Hey guys, welcome back to Sacred Vedic Astrology. My name is Samantha and I'm so lucky to be a professional Vedic sidereal astrologer. So my main goal with my content, with my videos, with my work is to bring the ancient and the accurate and predictive system of Vedic astrology into the Western world and do it in a way that is still modern, still fun, less fatalistic, more fun and open, all right? And we have a really fascinating video to get into today. Okay, we are going to look into the chart of Marilyn Monroe, who was this iconic figure, right? And what I think is going to be very fascinating in this chart analysis is all the mysterious, confusing, elusive sort of energy that existed in her life, right? There is so much about her life and her death that is very unknown, right? There's this open-ended question of what was really going on there. And it's a little bit spooky, right? When I was looking at her chart before recording this, because I always study the charts before, of course, I kept getting this like very chill feeling in my body of like, ooh, there's so much mystery and there's so much unknown, and there was just a lot of weird stuff that was happening. That's going to be very 8th house, right? She has a very, very powerful 8th house. That's also going to be Neptune, right? So we're going to go into chart analysis of Marilyn's chart and look at all these aspects. Like, how do we see that sort of confusing, mysterious, elusive, illusionary energy in the chart? Where do we see the scandals? Where do we see the sexual magnetism? Where do we see the film and the photography and the television and the interesting relationships? Because of course it's all going to be there, right? So this is going to be a really fascinating chart analysis, and I am very excited. Okay, so let us start with her first house. Okay, so this is already like a huge aspect of her life story, and it's a very simplistic one, but it will tell us so much. Okay, so Marilyn was a Cancer Lagna or ascendant. All right, so her ascendant's at 20 degrees of Cancer. Now, Neptune sits right there at 29 degrees, okay? 20 degrees, 29 degrees, that's a 9-degree orb of conjunction. So it's very close, it's very tight, right? Neptune is really there influencing her first house. Okay, so get this. Neptune is film, it's photography, it's television, but it's also illusion, deception, confusion, drugs, and alcohol. Okay, and that's like right there in her first house. So what that means is that she gets projected into the public through this Neptunian sort of lens, right? We see her through film, we see her through photography, we see her through these photos that are iconic that still exist to this day. We see her through deception, we see her through confusion. There's so much like unknown, mysterious energy about her life and her death and all of it. That's Neptune, right? Neptune is like this fog of confusion and illusion that we don't quite understand. And that's right there in her first house. Isn't that fascinating? And what's also very interesting about Neptune in the first is people can project a lot of ideas onto people that are very Neptunian, right? Because Neptune is this very absorbent sort of energy. So when someone has Neptune in the first house, a lot of times people project ideas onto them, right? Oh, you're this. Oh, she's this like iconic sexual symbol. And she might be like, wait, I don't feel like that's who I am. But so much projection goes on to her in her life. That's also very Neptunian. All right. And then the drugs and then the alcohol, right? That was also a big part of her life. And at least what they wanted to portray her to be was like she was always out of it and she had issues with substances, etc., etc. So that's very Neptune in the first house as well too. All right, but more than anything, Neptune in the first is going to give this really confusing, mysterious energy about someone where people are like, whoa, what is really happening? There's this constant mystique about that person. All right, so that's right there on her ascendant. Isn't that fascinating? Okay, so her ascendant is Cancer, which means the whole chart gets ruled by the moon. All right, so her moon is in the 7th house of Capricorn. Okay. So first ruler is in the 7th, and what's really fascinating about that first ruler being in the 7th house is the 7th house is relationships, connections, marriage, partnership. And when we think of Marilyn Monroe, I feel like most of us instantly start to think about the JFK of it all and the relationships and the interesting, fascinating people she was connected to. And it's really interesting because that first ruler is in the 7th of relationships, of connections, of partnerships. So her whole chart gets ruled by that energy, and that's really something that we constantly think about with Marilyn, is what was going on in that whole relationship. There's so much there. And moon in the 7th is very interesting in the way that wherever the moon is, there's a big focus there. So she's going to be like really focused on, she really wanted to find this marriage and this partnership, but it would always kind of go wrong. And there was a lot of issues in her relationships and marriage, et cetera, et cetera. So even though it was a big focus for her, with that moon in the 7th, something she was always thinking about, it was constantly there because that is the moon. It's a huge focus of the chart. The 7th ruler is also retrograde. Her 7th house is ruled by Saturn. It's hit by Rahu. Her Venus is in Aries, hit by Saturn. You know, her Jupiter is right next to Mars in the 8th house. Her 7th ruler is in the 8th house in the D9 of Vamsha. Oh my goodness, there is so much karma and conflict in marriage and relationships for her as well too. So it's really fascinating in the sense that like the moon is a focal point of the chart, right? It's always going to be a focus, but then we have to analyze further and be like, okay, but what is that 7th house doing? Because now it's getting ruled by a retrograde Saturn, and now Saturn is hit by Rahu, and Rahu's aspecting the 7th ruler, and the 7th ruler is in the 8th house of loss and confusion and deception and scandals in the D9 of Vamsha. It's really like that. It's like that. Okay, so yes, it's a focus, and yes, it's a big part of her chart, but then also the other planetary influences play out where there's also a lot of issues for her in marriage, in relationships. Okay, both things are true. Both things are going to be happening. All right, so first ruler is in the 7th. She's focused on relationships and her connections and her partnerships, right? And I think a big part of her fame and her success was a lot about the people she knew and the people that she was connected to, right? First ruler in the 7th house. And she also has this really interesting 11th house in the sense that the sun is there, the mercury is there in the 11th. So there's also a big focus for her on the 11th house of connections, groups, who she's connected to, right? This is a chart where her connections are actually very important in her career because her 11th ruler goes into her 10th house of career. So it brings that energy of the 11th house into the 10th house, right? It's like connecting those two houses. So that's very fascinating as well too. Who she was connected to was a big part of her career, okay? All right, so that's very fascinating. Now, moving on to the more spooky aspect of the chart as well too, let us look to this 8th house. So before we start analyzing the 8th house energy in Marilyn's chart, let's unravel what the 8th house is. Like, what does the 8th house rule, okay? So the 8th house rules scandals. The 8th house rules sexuality. The 8th house rules charisma. It's a very charismatic house. The 8th house rules astrology. The 8th house rules this more metaphysical sort of energy. The 8th house rules things that are hidden beneath the surface. So when someone has a powerful 8th house, there's a lot of stuff going on beneath the surface. There's like mysteries, and there can be this very mysterious energy about the 8th house. It's things that are more hidden. It's a moksha house, right? So it's very fascinating that that's also a huge part of her life story, and she has this very interesting Jupiter-Mars conjunction in her 8th house. So we see this activation of Neptune on her ascendant, confusion, scandal, deception, film, photography, television, projections, all of that. And then we also see this activated 8th house with Jupiter and Mars sitting there. And it also gets aspected by Rahu, by Rahu's 9th aspect as well too. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Usually when I'm looking at Rahu and K2 special aspects, I just know in my mind that it's going to trine the other like element, right? So if Rahu's in Gemini, it's going to trine the other air signs. That's a little trick if you want to like figure out like where Rahu and Ketu is creating its special aspects, whatever element it's in, it's going to trine the other elements, right? Maybe that was way too confusing for you guys to grasp, but you can see it in that way as well too. Okay. So, we have Jupiter, we have Mars in the 8th house, and then Rahu is aspecting. And Rahu is very tightly aspecting her Mars because Rahu is 24 degrees, Mars is 27 degrees. That's a 3-degree orb of aspect, right? So now, oh my goodness, we have Rahu on Jupiter aspecting Mars. That's this huge expansive energy to the 8th house now, right? Rahu expands, Jupiter expands, and now there's this very expansive energy in the 8th house, okay? So this is going to be great for getting money from other people. This is going to be great for sexual charisma, right? This is going to be great for like wills, legacies, pensions. Money is going to roll in, in this chart because 8th house is other people's money, but also her second ruler is in the 11th house, which is a classic aspect of like huge financial wealth, right? You want to see connections between the second house and the 11th house to see like big wealth, okay? But you also would look to a powerful 8th house for money that comes from outside sources, right? So if Marilyn Monroe was still alive today, she would get money that was constantly rolling in from movies, from this, from that, from the other, right? It would just keep coming from outside sources. And that's the activation of the 8th house. It's other people's money. It's money that comes from outside places. It's not the money that we earn ourselves. It's money that just like keeps coming in. Okay, so that would have been like so powerful if she was still around. She would just keep getting, money. So really, really fascinating. But, it's going to be good to have a powerful 8th house for the sexual charisma. People are very charismatic when they have a powerful 8th house. They just are. They really, really are. You're going to see a lot of these like celebrities, a lot of these famous people that had a lot of sexual appeal. They have a powerful 8th house. It's charismatic. It just is, okay? But the downside of the 8th house is it creates a lot of ups and downs and highs and lows and scandal, and it can be a more intense sort of life path or life experience as well too. There's a lot that someone has to work through in this life, right? It's the depths, it's the darkness, it's the taboo, it's the psychological, right? Like the 8th house is getting to the roots, getting to the depths of something. It's this very deep moksha sort of house. All right. And it's very fascinating as well, too, that like Rahu aspects Jupiter next to Mars. And such a big part of how we remember Marilyn Monroe, whether this is good or bad, I don't know, that's up for interpretation. But a big sort of remembrance of her legacy is quite literally her like sexual appeal, right? Like that's one of the most prominent aspects of how we remember her. And Rahu is heightening that 8th house of sexual charisma. Right, so it's very, very fascinating. And then Rahu is also in her 12th house. 12th house is also like sexuality, bed pleasure, and Vedic astrology. Rahu's expanding that as well too. So it's very, very fascinating, right? So we can see all these like very specific pinpointed elements of her life that are reflected through the Vedic astrological chart as well too. Okay, so then we get this expansive 8th house, which is going to show ups and downs, confusion, scandal. The 8th house can be this very scandalous house, and it can actually very specifically connect to sexual scandals. Like another person who had a prominent 8th house, if I'm remembering correctly, was Bill Clinton. He has some strong 8th house influence, and he had this big sexual scandal, right? So the 8th house can also be scandals connected to sexuality, right? So very fascinating. I also did Barry Bonds' chart, and he had this like potent 8th house. And he had, these really interesting sexual scandals. So do you see how these things are, the themes are connected? Okay. So that's a huge part as well too of her charisma, her mystique, her mysterious sort of energy. I find a lot of like prominent 8th house energy creates this mysterious sort of aura about someone. It's like, ooh, what's like really going on beyond the surface, because there's a lot going on deep down. Okay, so really, really interesting. And then Jupiter with Mars. Mars is also like energy, it's life force. Jupiter is expanding that, and it's in the 8th house of life force. Energy comes out of them. So when someone has a powerful 8th house, again, it's that charismatic sort of energy. A lot of energy comes out of that person, right? And Marilyn Monroe had so much like energy to her that everyone was drawn to. They were fascinated by him. That's the 8th house. Okay. Now, something really interesting and very spot on as well too is that in her 10th house, even though Venus is in Aries, which Venus does not love Aries, right? Venus would prefer to be in its opposite sign of Libra. So that's very interesting. But Venus is the karaka for beauty, for creativity, for art, for pleasure, for fashion, for perfume, etc., etc. And that's quite literally in her 10th house of career, right? So that would mean that her career would connect to beauty, fashion, creativity, all of that. And that was her entire career, right? She was seen as this beauty, sexual icon. Okay, that's Venus. It's beauty. We can't really get much more literal than that. But what's very interesting is her Venus is opposite Saturn. So she has this Saturn-Venus opposition. So now Saturn's influencing her 10th house. So she actually has like some career issues 100% in this chart, right? Because Venus is opposite Saturn, Saturn's aspecting the 10th, Ketu is also aspecting the 10th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now that's very fascinating because Ketu is also film, photography, and television, and it's aspecting her 10th house of career. So now we get the creativity, we get the beauty, we get the fashion, and now we get a Ketu influence, which is film, photography, television onto the career, okay? But Ketu is a confusing, elusive energy in the career as well too. So now we get more of that like confusing what's really going on. And then Saturn's aspecting, which Saturn on the 10th will also show some like feelings of being stuck in the career. So there's a few malefic influences on the 10th, and the 10th ruler is in the 8th house of deception, confusion. 8th house is a moksha house, but it's also a dhisthana house. Right? So we also see career issues, which is funny because there's Venus in the 10th, there's Ketu, film, photography, television, beauty, but also we get these malefic influences that are also playing out as well too. So the career was far from perfect, right? I remember there was like moments in her career early on where she would show up and she was drinking and they would have to send her home, and I think she almost got fired like a multitude of times from different jobs because of that. She had all these scandals in her career, and then she got involved with God knows what, with the whole JF. There's so many things, right? There were so many things that were going on in the career that made it far from perfect, far from seamless. Like she did have those malefic influences also playing out in the career as well too, right? So it's not one, it's not the other, it's all of it, right? If we see a lot of malefics aspecting the 10th house and the 10th rulers in the 8th house, best believe at some point there's going to be some issues, scandals, confusion, weird stuff in the career as well too, right? It's just going to happen. And I would assume, especially with that like Ketu influence on the 10th, that if she was like still around, she might have like changed her career path. There might have been different things that she was interested in as well too. Okay, so isn't that very fascinating, right? Because all of that is very spot on. Now, what's also interesting in her chart is that her Rahu is in the 12th house, her Ketu's in the 6th house. So Rahu is pulling you into a house, Ketu's where you've been before, right? It's the familiarity, but it's also the void of the chart. So Rahu's in the 12th. For her, she's pulled into the 12th house. She's pulled into film, photography, television. 12th house is moksha. Pulled into foreign travels. I'm sure she did a lot of traveling. And then Ketu's in the 6th house, which means that she can have some weird, confusing health issues, right? Whenever Ketu's in the 6th, there can be some weird stuff going on with her health, right? And then Saturn also aspects that Ketu in the 6th house. So I don't know too much, to be quite honest, about her health, but she definitely would have had to like watch out for some weird health issues. So let's actually look that up, because I don't know anything about this. Okay. And again, it might be something that no one knows. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so Marilyn Monroe experienced significant mental and physical health issues throughout her life. depression, mood swings, insomnia, substance abuse, which led to multiple hospitalizations. Okay. Family history of mental health. Okay, physical health issues, endometriosis. Okay. So it lists, I'm not going to list them all, but it lists this like long list of health issues. So with K2 in the 6th, that's a malefic in the 6th house, so she can overcome it, hit by Saturn, but there's definitely going to be some weird health stuff going on, right? Because K2 is like weird, strange, it's in the 6th house of health, Saturn's a malefic aspect in it, and then her 6th house ruler is next to Mars, a malefic, and then her 6th house is in the 8th house, a Dastana house, so like one Dastana house gets ruled by another Dastana house. So we would really want to watch for her health in this lifetime with this chart as well too. So she obviously had a lot of health issues, a lot of like mysterious, weird health stuff with that Ketu in the 6th, aspected by Saturn, 6 rulers in the 8th house, Dastana house, next to Mars, okay? Okay, so that was that. I actually did not know about any of that until this, but I was looking at that Ketu in the 6th. I'm like, no, she had to have had some weird health stuff going on. Okay. So another thing I want to look to in Marilyn's chart is the 5th ruler, right? Because Marilyn Monroe famously did not have children. I don't think she wanted them. She might have even had issues trying to conceive children. And her 5th house of children is ruled by Mars in the 8th house. So her 5th ruler is in the 8th house of loss, okay? And it's also hit by Rahu. So the 5th ruler's in the 8th house, Dastana house, bad house, and then it's hit by Rahu, which is piling on another malefic influence, right? So this is a chart where if she wanted to have children, she would just have to be careful or do it in maybe a more non-traditional way, because 5th ruler in the 8th house hit by Rahu can give some like loss or some issues around conceiving children, 100%. Okay. So there is that. Her 7th ruler is retrograde, which means marriage is a choice for her. Her 7th ruler is also hit by Rahu, another malefic, right? So the 7th house in this chart definitely has issues, and we can see all of that played out in her life, right? Because also Neptune being on her 1st house aspects her 7th house of relationships, and then Neptune brings that deceptive, confusing, elusive, illusionary energy into the 7th house as well too. All right, so all of that is going on. I thought this would be interesting as well too. Let's see what's going on in her D10 chart with her career. Okay, so in her D10, her sun is in the 10th house, which would show that her career is probably going to be working for herself, working her own path. She's not going to love a traditional job. With sun in the 10th house, there's going to be some element of herself, right? Sun is like autonomy, independence, showing up as you are in the career. And then her 10th ruler, of course, is in the 9th house, ruled by Venus, which is beauty, luxury, the arts, creativity, and it's actually next to 2 benefics. So her 10th house in the D10 is actually pretty powerful in the sense that her 10th ruler is, so her 10th house is Gemini, it's ruled by Mercury, and it's next to a really strong Venus in Taurus and a moon in Taurus. Venus loves Taurus, moon loves Taurus. And those are 3 benefics all in her 10th ruler in the D10. So the chart can be successful. I mean, the career can be successful, connected to creativity. Also, Mercury can be writing, intellect, mental energy as well too. Okay. So that's actually really powerful for her 10th house. And what I think is so spooky ooky about the whole aspect of Marilyn Monroe's chart and how everything happened is she was in the Dasha of her 8th house when that mysterious death unfolded. Okay, let's find out what date this was. Okay, August 4th, 1962. Now let us look at her dashas. 1962. Okay. Ooh. Okay. So Marilyn was in a Jupiter Dasha in 1962. She was specifically in the Jupiter Moon Dasha. Now, Now. This is where things get real eerie, real spooky ooky. Okay, so Jupiter is in her 8th house. All right, it's next to Mars, a malefic. It's hit by Rahu, another malefic. It's in the 8th house of accidents, death. You know, the 8th house is a Dasha house. We do not like the Dasha time periods of the 8th house, right? Unless someone has like tons of benefics in the 8th house, then they could make a lot of money in that Dasha. They could get a lot of outside, money. They could also have a lot of charisma. They could do well with astrology, metaphysics in that Dasha. But if someone is not, working with other people's money, or like an astrologer, and they go into an 8th house Dasha and it's hit by 2 malefics, so Jupiter's in the 8th Dasha house and it's hit by Rahu and it's next to Mars, then we have to be really cautious in that Dasha sequence, because the 8th house can connect to death and loss, and it's a negative house, right? So interestingly enough, she was in that 8th house Dasha when her mysterious death did occur. It kind of gives me chills. It really, really does. And the 8th house, again, is that mysterious sort of house. It's the unknown. It's what's going on beyond the surface. And that was the exact Dasha she was in when that mysterious death did unravel. Right? Pretty wild. Pretty wild. And then in her chart, Jupiter rules the 1st house, right? So rules, or actually, let's see, wait, Jupiter, hold on. Okay, so Jupiter rules the 9th house and the 6th house, and then goes into the 8th. Okay, pretty wild, right? Because 6th house is also a Dasha house, and it goes into the 8th house, another Dasha house. So that Jupiter Dasha would be one to really watch for and be cautious of, because it's, has all of this malefic influence, and it is connected to another Dasha house as well too. Whew. And it's also pretty wild because Jupiter is her Dharkarka in the 8th house, and that's like the public. Dharkarka is like the spouse, the relationships, the public. And she was in the Dasha of the public, of other people, of spouse, relationship in the 8th house of death and loss, which is very, eerie. Okay. So that is something I've always thought was so crazy. Like early on when I was studying Vedic astrology, I looked at Marilyn Monroe's chart and I was like, I cannot believe that she was in the Dasha of the 8th house, just on a house of death, loss, confusion, scandal, when she had a scandalous, confusing death. It's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. All right. All right, so that is that, right? That was a pretty interesting overview into these really minute aspects of Marilyn Monroe's chart, and that Neptune in the 1st house, the confusion, the deception, the illusions, the drugs, the alcohol, the film, the photography, the television, right? And then the Jupiter Mars hit by Rahu, really expanding her 8th house of charisma and sexual appeal, but mystery and confusion and deception and scandal and sexuality and other people's money and charisma, right? And mystery, right? The 8th house is a very mysterious sort of house. Now, what I also find very interesting about Marilyn's chart is she must have been very intuitive, right? Whenever someone has a powerful 8th house, they have a very strong intuition about them as well too. So I don't know if there's like anything about this. Let's see. She had to have had some strong spiritual intuitive experiences. Okay. So her spirituality was complex and evolving. She was influenced by her evangelical upbringing, later identifying as atheist Jewish, and practiced yoga for inner peace. Then there's a lot of spiritual or paranormal claims about her, that her spirit is in the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. That's a good one. I love the Roosevelt. I was always like drawn to that since I was younger. Okay, so she was a devoted student of yoga. That's interesting. I did not know that. And some sources suggest she yearned for a more profound spiritual life, desire for family and belonging, and a feeling of being surrounded by those focused on the physical world. Okay. Yeah, so something I think that we don't, based on her chart, something that we don't see about her is that she was very deep. Like, she had this deep sort of philosophical side to her. There was probably this part of her that was very introspective, very spiritual, right? Jupiter, Mars in the 8th house. She longed for this more moksha sort of energy, something beyond. But then Neptune's in her 1st house, so people are projecting onto her, and then they see the sexual energy and a lot of deception, a lot of illusions onto who she is with Neptune in the 1st house as well too. So that's really fascinating. I think there is this side of her that, a lot of people didn't see as well. Yeah, and what's really fascinating too is, she has Saturn in her 4th house. So Saturn in the 4th, it's hit by Rahu. There would be definite issues with like her happiness, her upbringing, her home life, her mother, her family life, right? That would be something that was absolutely going on. And let's see if she had issues with her mother. Okay, she had a tumultuous relationship with her mother due to her lifelong struggle with mental illness. Yeah, okay. So the malefics on the 4th house would affect the relationship with the mother and would also affect her happiness, right? Because the 4th house is the house of happiness. Saturn is there. It's hit by Rahu. It's not a great influence. It's not a great energy for that. We do get Jupiter, which can bring, a little bit of a saving grace, but Saturn in the 4th hit by Rahu is not easy for the family life, the happiness, the mother, the upbringing as well too. Okay. Oh, and does Mars also hit? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. All right. So that was a quick, I say quick, but that was like 30 minutes. But obviously there's so much we could pull from her chart, but I just wanted to focus on some main important elements of the chart and where we get all that like scandal and confusion and, deceptive and the drugs and the alcohol and the film and the photography and the television, but the art and the beauty and all of it is really right there. All right. So really, really fascinating chart. Something I did actually want to bring up. This is really important. So we look at her chart and we see Sun conjunct Mercury in the 11th house, right? And so we're like, okay, 11th house, groups, large financial gains, dreams, desires, those are going to be important for her. But whenever planets sit in the 11th house, they aspect directly the 5th house, right? And the 5th house is the house of the mind, mental energy, creativity, the arts. It's the very creative house, right? So that Sun Mercury is now aspecting the 5th house, which also gives more of that creative, artistic influence, right? And she probably had some interest in like writing, reading as well with that influence on the 5th house, and Sun with Mercury. Sun is influencing Mercury, which is the intellect, the mind. So she probably had some love for like learning, intellect, writing, reading. Let's see. Okay, so Marilyn Monroe had a deep love for writing, using it as a form of therapy to express her feelings through poetry, notes, letters, which revealed her introspective side. Did I not just tell you guys she had this deeply introspective side? This passion for writing was a private outlet. I also said she had a private side. Okay. Often kept alongside her film scripts and notebooks. Yeah, so Sun with Mercury. Sun is a focal point. It's an interest. It's next to Mercury, which is writing, expression, communication, learning, teaching, books, etc. And then it influences the 5th house of writing, publishing, creativity, the arts. So there's going to be a focus for that in her chart as well too. Okay, and because she has so much 8th house energy, like I said earlier, she has this very introspective, spiritual hidden side that we did not see. Marilyn Monroe was probably a very complex person. There was like a lot of different things going on for her. And that Neptune on the ascendant, people just wanted to project this one version of her. Oh my God, she's beautiful and she's gorgeous and she's sexually this and all these things. And it's like there was so much going on beneath the surface with all that 8th house energy as well too. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this chart analysis video. Let me know your thoughts. Have you guys always found her fascinating? Have you always found her interesting? I still think it's one of the eeriest things that she was in the 8th house Dasha when everything happened, hit by Rahu next to Mars. Whew, that was a dangerous Dasha sequence for her chart. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so comment, like, and subscribe for more content coming soon, and let me know if you guys have any requests of certain charts you want to see, certain things you want me to go into, and hopefully this brought a really interesting look into the astrological chart of someone that was so mysterious, and there was so much mystique and so much going on beneath the surface. Really fascinating, and I think Marilyn Monroe is one of those people that we will remember forever. Truly so iconic, so interesting, and yeah, really fascinating. All right, so we will talk soon, and you guys can always book a personal reading as well too. In the link in my bio, it's down there, and I essentially will do this with your chart, but more in depth. All right, we'll talk soon. Bye, guys.